Hi there, Davey Cretin here for Cretin Classics, and I'm doing another tribute video for Dave Cousins, who is best known for his work with progressive rock band Strawbs. Now, this guy led a really fascinating life that I knew nothing about, but I did a bunch of research on him, and I've been listening to a bunch of the classic Strawbs albums from the 70s. Great progressive rock stuff, really underrated and undervalued bands. So I would recommend checking out their 70s stuff. I mean, how many bands can claim to have famous keyboard players with them? First of all, Rick Wakeman played with Strawbs in the early 70s before he joined Yes. That was his claim to fame. That's how he got famous. Melody Maker magazine focused in on Rick Wakeman. And Yes, poached him from Strawbs. It's what happens in the music business. Sometimes people move on to other acts, and one act is left in the lurch. So Dave Cousins, he's known as Dave Cousins, although professionally he's Dave Cousins, but he preferred to be called David. He's got a great first name. What could I say? I'm known as Dave, Davey, David, any of those, but in his personal life, he liked people to call him David. Now, got a lot of notes here because, like I said, a fascinating life I knew nothing about. He was born David Joseph Hinson, or Hindson, Hindson. He was born January 7th, 1940. Hope I'm pronouncing this right. Hounslow, Middlesex, England. British gentleman. Unfortunately, he passed away a couple of days ago on July 13th, 2025, at the age of 85 in Canterbury, Kent, in the UK, in England once again. This guy had a 62-year career. That's nothing to laugh at. That's nothing to sneeze at. From 1963 to 2025. He's a singer-songwriter. He wrote the bulk of the songs in Strawbs. Guitar player, played a lot of acoustic guitar, and there's very, very interesting guitar playing in this band because you have a lot of acoustic guitar, and then on top of it you have electric guitar. So it's a really cool, unique blend that Strawbs had, besides the proggy keyboards, good rhythm sections. He also played banjo, and he played something that's known as the Appalachian dulcimer. It's like a zither. It's an unusual looking instrument. If I wasn't recording this on my cell phone, I'd show you a picture of what one looks like. Now, when David was only 7 months old, his father died in World War II. So this is since he was born January 1940, this is the summertime of 1940, and Europe was embroiled in World War II, or the whole world was basically, unfortunately. He was 6 years old. At 6 years old, a little later on, his mother married a man named Jack Cousins. Hence the name change. A 6-year-old kid, they changed his surname from Hindson or Hinson, however it's pronounced, to Cousins. So that's how he became David Cousins. On the first day of grammar school, he met future Strawbs member Tony Hooper. So can you imagine that? You have a friend that you meet when you're young, and then you form a band with them over 15 years later. Fascinating stuff. After finishing school before attending the University of Leicester, and I know Leicester pretty well. I've never been there, but I had a good friend who was from Leicester, England. After finishing school, Cousins, Hooper, and 2 of their friends formed a skiffle band. Remember skiffle from your Beatles history, everyone out there? They formed a skiffle band called the Gin Bottle 4. And David, in my notes it says, as he preferred to be called, was active in the Folk Society at university and the Jazz Club at university. In fact, he started the Folk Society. At 22, unfortunately, his stepfather, Jack Cousins, passed away, and David took on the mantle of supporting the family on his own. Once he graduated from university, he worked in a lot of different jobs, odd jobs, furniture delivery, meat production, and advertising. And after that, he became the media manager of Preprint and Publishing Company before starting his own company. How industrious a lad was this man, David Cousins? And that was called Center Plan. Center spelled C-E-N-T-R-E, plan is one word. And that acted as a local press booking facility for advertising agencies. At 23 years old, so this would be 1963, he and his old childhood friend Hooper formed folk band the Strawberry Hill Boys. So he went from skiffle to folk. In June 63, he made his first appearance on BBC Radio with the Strawberry Hill Boys. A lineup on the BBC in 1963, you got it, the Beatles. He was at BBC Radio when the Beatles were performing at BBC Radio. And anyone who knows that cool double CD Capitol put out in the 90s, yeah, the early 90s, Live at the BBC by the Beatles, Dave Cousins was there. Now, shortly after he performed, not with the Beatles, but on the same bill as the Beatles, let's say, where I lost my place in my notes, sorry. Right after that, the Strawberry Hill Boys opened up at the famous Eel Pie Club. I think that's the name of it, or Eel Studio. I didn't write it down. He opened up for the Rolling Stones. So Beatles, Rolling Stones, David Cousins was right in the mix here. Then in 1966, Cousins did a solo tour of Denmark. Singer-songwriter, acoustic guitar, just took his guitar, went to Denmark, and he supported The Who on Danish TV. You got the Beatles, you got the Stones, now you got The Who. And he's a folk singer, solo folk singer. He's playing with the Strawberry Hill Boys. Then he becomes a producer for Dan Marks Radio, D-A-N-M-A-R-K-S Radio, until his music career forced him, until the Strawbs got so popular, early 70s, in 72, he stepped away from his radio job. So he's supporting his family, his mother, supporting the family. He's working in the folk band, Strawberry Hill Boys, and now he's working in radio. So this was not a lazy man. This was an industrious man, and more power to him. In 1967, Cousins and the now newly rebranded Strawbs, they shortened the name, thought it would fit on bills better instead of the long, elongated Strawberry Hill Boys, shortened it to the Strawbs. They made an album with folk singer Sandy Denny. A lot of you know she's famous for the British folk scene in the 60s and early 70s. She passed away far too young in the late 70s, but that's another story. So Dave Cousins and Strawbs recorded an album with Sandy Denny called Sandy Denny and the Strawbs. They had no distributor to release the album, and shortly after, Sandy Denny had left working with the Strawbs, and she joined Fairport Convention, the biggest band on the British folk scene at the time in the late 60s. So this album was shelved and didn't get released until 1973 at the height of Strawbs' fame. Changing pages. Also, I'm going to take a little break to take a sip because I got a lot of stuff to say. In 1968, finally, they released a single under the name Strawbs called Oh How She Changed. Now, the release of this song led Dave Cousins and the Strawbs to an American record label called A&M Records, also famous for having Styx on my shirt, Joe Jackson, Squeeze, Herb Alpert and the Tijuana Brass, and of course Herb Alpert was the A in A&M Records, the M, Jerry Moss. This was the first signing, the first time A&M Records had signed a British band, and it was the Strawbs. So there's a fascinating tidbit. In 1969, Strawbs released their debut self-titled album just called Strawbs. At this time, Cousins was also doing session work for a lot of folk and Irish music. Get this. He worked with Joni Mitchell. He worked with Leonard Cohen. Mary Travers, everyone knows her from Peter, Paul, and Mary fame, but she did make some solo releases too. Mary Hopkin, who was on the Beatles' Apple Records roster at the time. And here we go, the Irish connection. The Clancy Brothers with Tommy Makem. So he's making the rounds as a session guy. He's still working in radio at this point in 1969, and his band just signed a deal with A&M Records. Busy man. Dave Cousins was indeed a busy man. And at the same time, he's still running Centerplan Advertising Company. And he's also running a club he had opened called, the Hounslow Arts Lab in Hounslow, England, where he was born. And he's still a radio producer. So he's juggling so many balls at the same time. I find this fascinating. I could barely walk and chew gum at the same time. And here's a guy who's juggling 7 balls at the same time. Blows my mind. I'm very impressed. Now, eventually, all these extracurricular activities that weren't part of the Strawbs world would have to stop as the Strawbs grew in popularity. More on that as I go along. Now, after their second album in 1970, Dragonfly, they hired a keyboard player, and they were sort of started out as a folk band. And at the time, this was also known as progressive folk, the way folk music was mutating. And eventually, this would turn into the early 70s, what we now term progressive rock. So after the second album, they had this new keyboard player in the band, guy I mentioned before, Rick Wakeman. And I want to do a short little aside saying a few dozen members have played with Strawbs over the years, because the band was from 1967 until 2023, their final performance. Besides Rick Wakeman, you had Blue Weaver, known for working with the Bee Gees and Mott the Hoople on keyboards. Also, from the early Renaissance band, before Annie Haslam joined, you had John Hawken, that's Hawken, play with the Strawbs. He was in Renaissance. So a lot of these British bands, it's very incestuous in a way. Can't think of any other words, sorry about that. That everyone knows everyone, everyone's playing with everyone, because England is such a small country. They're still small compared to the expansive United States. So besides those 3 guys, Wakeman, John Hawken, who was in the Nashville Teens and Renaissance, I should add, and Blue Weaver, who went on to then play with Mott the Hoople and play with the Bee Gees. He's all over the Saturday Night Fever record. Those cool keyboards you hear in the Bee Gees in the second half of the 70s, that's all Blue Weaver. Guy's a talented man, very good keyboard player, underrated, unknown. He just lurks in the background. Aces as a player. Besides these guys, the later incarnations of the Strawbs in the 2000s, get this, would feature both 2 of Rick Wakeman's sons on keyboards. You had Adam Wakeman and Oliver Wakeman playing with the Strawbs. So all 3 Wakeman boys played in the Strawbs. Only 2 of them played in Yes. Strawbs went out again. Check out their 70s albums. Now, going back to my notes here after that little tangent. So Wakeman recorded 2 albums with the Strawbs. 1970, their second album after Dragonfly is called Just a Collection of Antiques and Curios. This was a live album, so we're not going to count it with the studio records. But that's the record where Melody Maker saw Wakeman. They heard the record, they saw a concert, and they said, this guy's a superstar. And they featured Rick Wakeman as a future superstar. This is how Yes found out about him. But before he left Strawbs, he also made the 3rd studio album with the Strawbs called From the Witchwood. Remember that word, witchwood, one word, witch and wood together, witchwood. That'll come into play later on in this torrid tale of woe. So Yes poached him, like I said, and after the 2 albums, the live album, the studio album with Strawbs, Wakeman goes on to Yes. That's a completely different story for another time. Now, 1972, had a slightly revamped lineup. They released their 4th studio album, Grave New World. Not Brave New World, but Grave New World. And this was their big breakthrough album, their #4 studio album. Hit number 11 in the UK, sold over 94,000 copies, which is a lot of copies for a small country like England. This was their breakthrough, finally. And this is when Dave Cousins started dropping everything else because the Strawbs were on an incline, and he had to devote a lot more time to writing, recording, and of course touring, doing press, etc., for his band, the Strawbs. He was the guy who's started the band, co-founded the band with his friend, and he's the leading light of the band and the only member to perform on every album thus far through 2023. Oh, it was also, Grave New World was the first Strawbs album to chart in America on the top 200 Billboard album chart. January 73 saw the release of their fifth album and biggest studio album at the time, Bursting at the Seams. It was #2 in the UK, #65 in Canada. Cousins had a song on the album called Lay Down. It hit #12 in the UK, and there was a song by two members, Hudson and Ford, called Part of the Union, that hit #2 in the UK on the singles charts. And of course, because it charted so high, the band performed on Top of the Pops, miming to the song. And you've got to see this clip because the outfits are outrageous. You could tell they're miming, and it's a really good clip to see. And of course, Dave Cousins is there. He wasn't singing lead, but he's playing the acoustic guitar. He's rocking out. So check that out. It's on YouTube, Performance. And look for the longer, slightly longer clip, because Part of the Union is a very short song. It's under 3 minutes long. So definitely check out the longer clip, because I don't know who he is, but I'm sure someone could tell me in the comments below. There's a host on Top of the Pops, and he looks a little creepy, and he's a little pervy with what he's saying to the women in the audience. You got to see this to believe it. This guy might be some kind of famous actor in England. I don't know. He has long gray hair, and he's just a little odd. So check out that clip on YouTube. Strawbs, Part of the Union, Top of the Pops. Just another slight aside here is that the gentleman who co-wrote and sang Part of the Union, the lead vocals, he performed at one of my record stores that I worked at. He did a solo gig. More on that in a future show on my channel when I talk more about my record store. I have a series that I just started on that, and I will be talking about that. And he closed the set, solo acoustic performance of the Strawbs, Part of the Union, biggest hit he was involved in. Moving back to my notes here. So because the band, of course, started having such big success, it bred disharmony within the ranks of the band. They went through some membership changes. By 1975, they put out the album called Ghosts, plural at the end. And it was their highest charting album in America at #47. After 1978's Deadlines failed to chart in the US, the writing was on the wall, and the band ended up splitting. Dave Cousins split up the band in 1980. In 1980, he became the program controller at Radio Tees. This is a radio station in the UK. In 1983, he left Radio Keys and joined Devon Air Radio as the station controller. So he goes from a successful rock band to a success in independent UK radio. He's not working for the BBC. He's working for these independent stations. And he was so successful over almost a 20-year period from 1980 to 1999 that in 1999, he launched something called Radio Victory. He was chairman of the board. It's like the highest seat you could have at a radio station. 6 weeks later, after he formed Radio Victory, he sold it. Get this, £3.1 million in 1999. This guy's no slouch at business. Great at music, great at business. Moving on to my last page of my notes. Now, all the while he kept his hand in music while he was in radio, he's playing shows with a gentleman by the name of Brian Willoughby. and they're performing as acoustic Strawbs, just as a two-man group going around doing Strawbs songs acoustic, all the songs that David Cousins wrote. Also in 1983, Rick Wakeman, who was out of Yes at this point and doing solo record after solo record after solo record, guy's got like 100 solo albums to his name, Rick Wakeman, amazing body of work he has. He had a TV show at the time in the early 80s, Rick Wakeman. He had Dave Cousins on, and there was a Strawbs reunion. So after knocking the band on the head in 1980, he brings the Strawbs back in 1983, and they've been a growing concern ever since. So for a short time, there was no Strawbs, then the Strawbs are back. So he's doing his radio job, he's doing acoustic Strawbs, he's doing reunion shows, and the occasional album with the Strawbs. So he's still a busy guy. Now, at the turn of the century, as I was saying, 1999, when he left radio and got the big payout, he used his earnings to start Witchwood Media. I told you that name would come back. After the album from the Witchwood, the third studio album by Strawbs, he names his media company Witchwood Media, right from a Strawbs record. And the label they made the first actual release on CD that you could hear of an acoustic Strawbs performance, studio albums. They're releasing Strawbs albums, acoustic Strawbs albums, and solo records. All through his life, David Cousins released 10 solo albums, starting in 1972 and ending in the 2000s. 2 of those records are with Rick Wakeman. 1 studio record and also 1 live record, that when they toured the studio record. Okay, now, David's voice might also be familiar to heavy metal fans, because in 1980, he does a spoken word intro to a song called When the Walls Came Tumbling, apostrophe down, When the Walls Came Tumbling Down, from the first album by Sheffield's own Def Leppard, 1980s On Through the Night. So all you metalheads watching, you've heard David Cousins' voice before on a Def Leppard record. All totaled, during their histories, like close to 60-year history, Strawbs released, 55 years, Strawbs released 23 studio albums, 11 live albums, 10 compilations, 34 singles, and 7 video albums, either VHS, DVD, maybe Blu-ray later on. Cousins was married 3 times. He had multiple homes because between radio and music, the guy had it going on. That's what happens when you put your mind to something. Last Strawbs show was in August 2023 at the Cropredy, and I hope I'm pronouncing it right, Cropredy Folk Festival. This was spearheaded years before by Fairport Convention. They were always the big band at Cropredy, if I'm pronouncing it right. Richard Thompson, who was in Fairport Convention, he plays also a lot at the Cropredy Festival in the UK. Where am I? Late 2024, Dave Cousins guested on stage with his old mucker, Rick Wakeman. You guessed it. So he by this time, he's in his early 80s, and he had some health issues. He had cancer problems. He had a knee replacement, just some other stuff, just old age and maybe just the rock and roll lifestyle, living on the road and playing all those shows, sort of burning the candle at both ends, as the cliche goes. So he wasn't a well man. That's why he started scaling back his appearances, live shows and public performances. And then finally, in March of this year, 2025, March 21st, saw his last public appearance at Bangor University, Bangor, in the UK. He lectured students there, and he showed off his songwriting compositional skills. He played excerpts from some of the songs that he had written as examples to give the students, Here's how you write a song. This is what I did with this song. And he's playing excerpts from Strawbs songs, his last public appearance. And to bring it, the whole story, long story here, full circle. 1964, November 1964, before I was born, Strawberry Hill Boys had performed at Bangor University. So talk about full circle and the story ending where it began. Pretty amazing. Wow. Sadly, on July 13th, a few days ago from me taping this video, 2025, David Cousins passed peacefully in a hospice at the age of 85. And like I said, it was in Canterbury, Kent, England. So rest in peace, David Cousins. You left a lot of music to the world, a lot of great music for everyone to listen to. And I plan to listen to a lot more Strawbs albums because I've just played a chunk of the 70s albums. I got to go back to the first two, definitely some of the later stuff. But it's really good prog rock. Started out folk, went to prog. Great singer-songwriter David Cousins. So I want to give my condolences to his family, his friends, his fans throughout the world, and all the fellow musicians that he played with. Thanks for all the music that you left for us. And I want to give a special thanks to two gentlemen I worked with at Titus Oaks Record Exchange, late 80s and early 90s. George and Joe, you turned me on to this great music. And that's the first time I had heard the Strawbs, because by the time I was aware of music in the late 70s, early 80s, the Strawbs had disbanded and they had no profile in the U.S., much like Renaissance, another band that George and Joe turned me on to, plus old Peter Gabriel era Genesis. So I'll be forever grateful to you guys. But rest in peace, David Cousins. Thanks for the music. Thank you for watching. Sorry I went a little long, but I just found that David Cousins had a really fascinating life. So this is my longest tribute video yet. Thanks for watching. I'm Davey Cretin for Cretin Classics. Rest in peace, David Cousins. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.